Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be focusing on the topic of data backup, and the title of today's webinar is Key Signs Your Backup Won't Work in a Disaster and What You Can Do About It. I hope you'll find this presentation interesting and informative. And I also want to mention that we'll have time for lots of questions at the end. But if something occurs to you before then, and you want an immediate answer, please just type your question into the Q&A box or the chat box, and one of our associates will let me know, and I'll do my best to answer it then. I want to begin with a really important question. Why are we even doing this webinar in the first place? Doesn't everyone already have backup in place? Here's something to think about. Pretty much everyone assumes they have home insurance. But if your home burned to the ground, would your insurance policy cover the full replacement cost? Would your insurance company put you and your family up in a hotel while you made other plans? Would they pay for a rental while you rebuilt your home? Well, the questions around data backup mirror a lot of those questions. Questions like, one, are you actually backing up all of your data? Number two, how often are those backups done? Number three, how long would it take to recover from a total disaster? And number four, how easy is it to recover individual files or folders? And going back to number three, I think a lot of businesses are actually surprised at how long it can take to recover from something like a server crash, especially if there's a lot of data involved. In fact, in our experience, that recovery can extend to many days, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Our truth is that a lot of organizations assume they have adequate backup, but how do you know for sure? And that brings me to a second, just as important question, and no, it's not rhetorical. Why do we do backup in the first place? So let me suggest 4 reasons. First, it's not uncommon for someone to accidentally delete a file or to change an original file without making a copy. Second, sometimes old data is archived because it's no longer required, but it might be needed for an audit or potentially for something like the sale of a business. We want to be able to recover that data when we need it. Third, what if an employee leaves on bad terms and then deletes files or folders that could be needed for a criminal investigation or civil trial, anything like that? And finally, and probably most important, what happens when disaster strikes? Your hardware fails, or you're hit with a ransomware attack, or, heaven forbid, your building is flattened by a tornado or goes up in flames, or criminals break in and steal all of your IT infrastructure. In every one of those cases, you need to be comfortable that you can recover all of your data and recover it quickly. If you can't recover all your data, that could have a serious impact on the viability of your business. And if it takes weeks to recover your data in the event of a disaster, that could put you permanently out of business. In fact, according to research done at the University of Texas, 94% of companies that suffer from a catastrophic data loss do not survive. 94%. 43% never reopen, and 51% may reopen, but they close within 2 years. So those are the risks. With that cheerful thought in mind, here's what we're going to talk about today. Number one, where does your data live? Is it in the cloud, the server, on your local hard drive, or maybe it's somewhere else? Number two, what are the different methods for backing up your data, and what are the pros and cons of those? Number three, how your data is at risk and what you can do to protect it. And number four, some dirty little secrets that you need to know about backup, especially as it relates to the cloud. And once you have a better understanding of your risk factors and why backup is so important, we'll focus on the following. Number one, how to keep your data safe. Number two, how often you should be doing backup. Number three, of course, finding the right backup solutions for your organization, and finally, we'll naturally have time for all of your questions. Let's move on. Now, if you've been on any of our previous webinars, you know that we're not big on secrets. So, quick word about the end. If you hang on to the end, we're going to tell you about a special offer that we put together. That offer will allow you to take advantage of one of the best, if not the best, backup solution in the industry and save money in the process. Even if you already have a backup solution, you'll want to hear what we have to say. So please stay tuned. Some of you have probably heard this before, but for the people who don't know me, let me make a brief introduction. I first became fascinated with computers when I was in high school at the age of 14, and today, frankly, that would make me a late bloomer. But in 1969, I was definitely an outlier. Ultimately, I decided to turn that passion into a profession, and I trained as a software engineer at U of T and York. And while I was still in my final year at York, I started my first business. By the time I was 30, my partners and I were running a software company with 25 employees. By the time I was 40, we'd grown to 80 employees with offices in Toronto, Montreal, New York, and LA. Well, I sold that business back in 1995 and founded Connectability to focus on IT infrastructure, because at the time I foresaw that desktop computing and network computing were going to be the foundation of future IT, and I wanted to be around to help other businesses achieve their long-term objectives in that world. Today, we've just finished our 28th year helping GTA businesses, and our double-digit growth over the past few years is proof of our customer-centric approach to IT service and support. Now, over the years, I've worked with many different kinds of backup, and I've learned, sometimes the hard way, what works and what doesn't work. My aim today is to share with you some of that hard-won experience. Just before we get started, I want to mention that, at least in my opinion, I think we're actually living in a golden age of backup. Why do I say that? Well, I think that the images in this slide will answer that question. In the past, when we were relying on devices like floppy disks and tapes for backup, we could never really be certain that if we needed to recover data, those backups actually worked. Without fail, a certain percentage of our data recovery attempts just didn't work. And that percentage could be as high as 50%. For example, on some occasions, we had to try 4 or 5 tapes before we found one that worked. And there was no guarantee that the tape that did work actually contained recent data. But today, with the wide availability of cloud backup solutions, we almost never see a failed data recovery. So let's start with the basics and talk about where your data lives. Perhaps it's on your local hard drive, or some of your data might be located in the cloud, or perhaps it's on a server in your office. Or it might be some kind of a hybrid or a combination setup where you have a server, but it's located in the cloud, like Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS. Well, the thing is, there's no such thing as one size fits all backup. And that's because there are so many different kinds of data in so many different places. So no single backup technology can do everything. Why is that? Well, ultimately, the technology that's best depends on a lot of different factors, like where's your data located? Is it on your desktop, in the cloud, or on a server? What kind of data is it? Are we talking about Word and Excel documents or a SQL database? It could be your entire ERP system. And finally, how much downtime can you live with? If your business can survive hours or more likely days of downtime, very few businesses can, but if yours can, then there are plenty of inexpensive basic backup solutions that could work for you. But if extended downtime is going to cost your business tens of thousands of dollars, and that's the more typical case, then one of those basic solutions just isn't going to cut it. So with that in mind, let's have a look at some of the different protections that are out there. But just before I do that, I want to stress a point. All too frequently, we've come across businesses who relied on either a USB thumb drive or an external hard drive for backup. This is not a good idea, and let me explain why. Thumb drives are small, they're tiny. You can drop one in your pocket and forget it's there. And that makes them easy to lose, or worse, have them stolen along with all of your precious data. They also frequently experience data corruption, which renders them useless. I've experienced that myself time and time again. Now, on the other hand, an external hard drive is less vulnerable to corruption, unless, of course, you drop it. And if that happens, you could very easily lose all your data in the process. We had a situation, in fact, a few years back where a customer left his backup drive in his car in the full heat of summer. To no one's surprise, when we went to access that drive, it was unreadable. And finally, if you're using a portable backup device like a hard drive and you don't take it off site, it will do you no good if you experience a disaster like a fire or a flood, or even in the case of theft. And if you do take it off site, do you have the discipline to replace it with another device so that daily backups continue, and the discipline to rotate those devices on and off site so that you have current off-site backups? So for all of these reasons, we think that using a portable device for backup is frankly a really bad idea. Well, let's get back to solutions that we do recommend, and we'll start with this: desktop data. If you're keeping your data on your local hard drive, the simplest and most cost-effective solution is to set up automated backup using Microsoft OneDrive, if you're using Microsoft Office, or Google Drive if you're using Google Workspace. Now, if I'm going to be direct, I don't think you should ever keep important documents on your local hard drive. That makes them vulnerable to theft, vulnerable to data loss. Instead, save your Word documents, your photos, and your spreadsheets directly to a cloud drive like OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox. Of course, if something does happen to your computer, you'll probably have to reload all of your software and then restore your data from the cloud. But that's better than having no backup. One more thing to mention: if you have a PC in your organization that performs some critical function, for example, payroll, you might want to consider a solution like Datto Cloud Continuity. And that solution performs a full image backups of that computer. So not just your data files, but your operating system, your software, all of your settings, everything. So if that computer fails, you can then boot it up in the cloud and continue working as if nothing had happened. Earlier, I mentioned a dirty little secret, and here it is. Many people believe that once their data is in the cloud, it's completely safe and backed up regularly. Unfortunately, they're only partially correct. First of all, just because your data is in the cloud, that doesn't mean it's automatically protected from hackers or disgruntled employees. If someone gets into your cloud folders, they get your credentials, or somehow they get your laptop or whatever it happens to be, they could access your data from anywhere and wreak havoc. In a sense, it could be more vulnerable because cloud data can be accessed from anywhere. Now, please understand, I'm not telling you not to keep your data in the cloud. Far from it. We use the cloud ourselves, and properly configured, your data is, in fact, safer in the cloud than anywhere else. But just like any other data, it needs to be protected. And in fact, here's an extremely nasty piece of malware. It's called Ransom Cloud. A hacker can use it to attack your mailbox or your cloud files and encrypt them until you pay a ransom. And if you'd like to see a very effective, and frankly, a very scary demonstration, jump on YouTube and search for Kevin Mitnick Ransom Cloud. I'm also going to ask our team to post that link in the chat box. You should see it there momentarily. Okay, you say, fine, but what about backups? Can't I just get Microsoft to reload my mailbox if this happens? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. While Microsoft and Google do perform backups of their cloud data, those backups are intended primarily for their use, and they therefore have limited functionality. So if your entire cloud information base is encrypted and you were to notice it right away, you can ask Microsoft to restore it, and they will bring it back to a point in time prior to the infection. But you could very possibly lose emails that weren't captured by those backups. For example, if data went missing from SharePoint, Microsoft can restore the entirety of your SharePoint data to a recent point in time, but they can't restore individual files or folders. What about when someone has either intentionally or accidentally deleted individual messages or files? Well, Microsoft maintains a maximum of 30 days of backup history, and for Google, it's only 15 days. So if those deletions happen before that, you're out of luck. And worse still, Microsoft only has the ability to bring back your entire cloud folder back to the way it was. So you might recover those lost or deleted items, but you will then lose everything that happened afterward. And finally, I should note that you cannot expect either Microsoft or Google to respond quickly in the event that something like this happens. You could wait hours or days for them to restore your data. So in other words, depending on Microsoft or Google, to keep your data safe and recoverable is not an effective strategy, and even they will tell you that. There's the dirty little secret. Well, what about other cloud storage solutions like Dropbox? On today's webinar, I'm really more focused on Office 365 and Google Workspace, since those are what the majority of our clients are using. But one thing I would suggest is this. If you're using a different platform, you should very carefully investigate their backup policy and history. Here's an example. As of the last time we checked, the consumer edition of Dropbox keeps only 30 days of history. Dropbox for Business, on the other hand, a more expensive product, keeps 180 days. But what if you need more than that? Well, those are the kinds of factors that you should weigh very carefully whenever you're choosing a cloud storage solution or a cloud product. So let's get back to our discussion about cloud storage and backup. The solution to the problems that I was outlining is a tool that's sometimes referred to as cloud-to-cloud backup. Essentially, what it is a service that performs regular automated backups of your entire cloud folder structure several times every day. So that includes your email, your files, shared folders. If you're on Microsoft, it includes Teams, and it operates totally in the background. There's nothing you need to do. But if you lose a file or an email, you can go back to any point in time and recover it without impacting the rest of your data. Now, this is a solution that we use ourselves and one that more and more of our customers are adopting as we all come to a better understanding of the risks and rewards of the cloud. Of course, one of the most critical data components in any business is your actual operating data, your books, your customer lists, accounts receivable and accounts payable, your payroll, and so forth. And in many cases, that data is contained in a database that's an integral part of an ERP system that could range from QuickBooks up to SAP. So how do we back up that data safely? Now, the problem with database backups is that if you just make a copy of the database file or database files, you could be capturing that information in the middle of a transaction. And that means that if you were to need to restore the database, you could end up with incomplete information or even broken transactions. Now, fortunately, there are several good options for protecting your valuable business data. If you're using Microsoft SQL Server, or several other database products, most of them have built-in backup utilities that will perform and verify a reliable database backup that can then be copied to the cloud. There are also backup agents that are specifically designed for backing up databases directly to the cloud. And finally, as we'll discuss in a moment, there's always the option of a full system image, which captures everything on the system, including the databases. And that brings me to backup technology number 4, cloud-based servers. We're starting to see more and more of these. So while a traditional on-premises physical hardware server is still widely used, many companies are increasingly moving their server infrastructure either wholly or partially into the cloud. Why is that? Well, if you compare the cost of purchasing your own server versus paying to host a server in the cloud option will almost always appear to be more expensive. But if you add in the cost of downtime when your server needs maintenance or replacement, the cost of replacing that server every 3 to 5 years, the cost of running your air conditioning during summer weekends, and the cost of electricity, it's not quite as cut and dry. And in fact, in many instances, a cloud-hosted server will deliver more predictable uptime and lower long-term operating costs. But if you do move your servers into the cloud, how do you protect whatever is on them? And how do you recover if you experience something like operating system corruption or a major malware attack? Well, the answer is something called a full image backup. In simple terms, it's a complete snapshot of your computer, including the operating system and all of your software and all of the settings and users, etc. And that full image backup is saved to a secure location like Amazon AWS, Wasabi, Backblaze, or Microsoft Azure. So if you do experience a disaster, you can perform what we call a bare metal restore over the internet. And what it means is essentially it will restore that complete image onto a brand new virtual machine. So you basically can pick up where you left off. And while it doesn't give you instant recovery, because both the server and the backups are located in cloud data centers, where there are very, very fast connections, the restore should be pretty quick. And I should also mention that a full image backup still gives you the ability to restore individual files or folders. So now we come to the 5th type of backup. And this one works best with on-premises servers, NAS drives, and key desktop computers. It is also the fastest and most reliable backup solution we've ever worked with. It's called Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery, or BCDR, and it comes from Datto, a company we'll talk about in a moment. What it is an appliance, piece of hardware that gets connected to your office network, and it works by performing a complete backup of your servers and your NAS and anything else you want to designate several times a day. Those backups are then automatically mirrored to the cloud. If you need to restore an individual file or folder, it's dead simple to do that. But this solution goes way beyond that. If your server or your NAS fails, the Datto appliance can actually take over and replace your server or your NAS until you've repaired or replaced them. And that process is completely transparent. Your downtime could be as little as a couple of minutes. So even if you had a total catastrophe like a flood, you can actually access your server or your NAS from one of the cloud backups. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about Datto, the company that offers this solution. And I'm going to do that in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to spend some time talking about how backups fail, which is really sort of the key point of this webinar. And the first way in which they fail is backup history. What does that mean? Well, it means how far do your backups go? A couple of days, a week, a month, a year? What would happen if you discovered a serious discrepancy in your books and you needed to go back and look at transactions from 3 years ago? Could you do that? What if a former employee deleted critical files or emails and you only discovered it 6 months after that employee left? Could you get that data back? Well, this is a common mistake that companies make. Too little backup history means you have very few options if data goes missing. We've seen situations where a company had only 2 days of backup history and both backups were bad. Don't make that same mistake. Well, next, number 2, we have insufficient granularity. Now, what do I mean by granularity? Simply this. If you find that you're missing a single file, a single folder, or a single email, can you recover that without having to restore an entire mailbox or an entire file system or an entire database? An effective backup solution allows you to recover individual items, or in the event of an emergency, to recover the entire data structure. Make sure your backup solution offers both of these options. Number 3, are there off-site copies of your data? Not just off-site copies, but relatively current off-site copies. Unfortunately, we've seen this failure before. Fortunately, not too often. But what if a catastrophe hits? A fire, tornado, or a flood? Maybe theft or vandalism. If your only backups are stored locally on a NAS drive or a hard drive, or even on something old-fashioned like tapes, those can all be wiped out by a disaster, leaving you with no IT infrastructure and no way to get your data back. Remember the statistic I quoted earlier? 94% of companies that suffer a catastrophic data loss do not survive. 43% never reopen, and 51% close within 2 years. And here's the other side of that coin, number 4. Companies who have no on-site backup. Backing up your data to the cloud is a very comforting experience because your data is now in someone else's hands. It's safe in a data center, typically multiple data centers, located at other locations, patrolled by security guards, and protected with encryption and biometric security. So all of that's wonderful. But what happens if you experience a total server failure and you now need to restore 4 terabytes of data from the cloud? On a typical 50/10 DSL connection, that will take you over 250 hours. That's nearly 11 days to restore your data. Can your business wait that long? And that's why we believe the most effective backup solutions are hybrid, which combines local backup containing recent data with cloud backups that maintain significantly longer backup history. And the good news is, while those failures could have a serious impact on the future of your business, they're easy to fix. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about Datto, since they provide many of the solutions we recommend. They're one of the leading providers of backup solutions, and in our experience, their solutions are pretty much bulletproof, as bulletproof as any backup solution we've ever used. To give you just a bit of background, the company was founded in 2007. They have 23 offices globally, along with 9 private data centers. They protect over 700,000 small to medium-sized businesses. And it says 1,900 employees. Well, in the last year and a half, they were acquired by Kaseya, which is a company that specializes in providing ongoing support and backup services. They are now more than 6,000 people strong. In fact, the Miami arena where the Miami Heat play is now called the Kaseya Center. So they have some money behind it. Datto offers a wide portfolio of backup products under the umbrella called unified continuity. And the idea, the goal, is to provide complete protection for all of your data, regardless of where it lives. So these solutions are designed to protect your servers, your NAS, individual PCs, and your cloud data. And the focus is on business continuity, not just maintaining backups. Yeah, I mentioned this before. Recovering your environment after a serious failure can be very time consuming. Based on the data collected by the cost of that outage to your business could be $200,000 or more. So the focus of Datto's backup solutions is to get you back up and running as fast as possible. And that includes the complete backup of all of your data, backup copies of that data in the cloud in multiple redundant data centers. In Canada, I believe there's one I know there's one in Toronto, and I believe the other one is in Calgary. The ability to virtualize your servers and your NAS, testing and validation of your backups. And that's really important because if the backups are not regularly tested and validated, you never know if they're going to work when you need them. Backup history, so the ability to go back to any point in time. And finally, all of that is backed up by a 24/7 help desk designed to help you and us recover quickly when necessary. Now, you might be asking why we spend so much time talking about backup. And here's something to think about. The original IBM PC XT was introduced in 1983 with a 10 megabyte, that's mega, not giga or terabyte, a 10 megabyte hard drive. Today, the average desktop PC might come with a 1 terabyte SSD. So that's 10,000 times more storage. Sometimes in the computing world, we refer to that as 5 orders of magnitude greater. Now, back in the day, you could easily back up your computer and all of your key files onto a few floppy disks. So with 10,000 times more data, imagine how many floppy disks you would need to back up 1 terabyte of data. And I want to connect that thought to some of our recent client experiences. So over the past 18 months, we had 2 clients who experienced complete server failures and 1 client who experienced a serious ransomware attack. None of them had BCDR protection. And in all of these cases, we had suggested it. And therefore, their average recovery time was 10 days. Today, all 3 of them have BCDR appliances. My question is, do you want to be next? So in short, we believe that backing up your data is only half of the total picture. Unless you can recover that data quickly when you need it, your backups are, in fact, inadequate. I think the most important point is that you and your IT provider are responsible for the safety of your priceless business data. With rare exceptions, your data is not going to back itself up. So you need to work with your IT provider to identify all the sources of your data and choose the backup solution that's going to meet your needs. And you'll want to consider factors like how often do you want your data backed up? How much downtime can you afford? And whether you can afford to lose any data at all. Please remember that the cost of downtime includes many different components, and that includes your ability to take orders, your ability to deliver your product or service, the value of your staff's time, and numerous other factors. Most of the time, we find that the cost of adequate backup pales in comparison to the cost of extended downtime. I mentioned at the beginning of our talk that we have a special offer for you. Our aim is to make sure that every single one of our clients has adequate backup for all of their data, and that when necessary, we can recover that data with minimal effort and in record time. So with that in mind, we're offering the purchase of a Data Cirrus BCDR appliance, no charge for the hardware. First month is free, and then the first month of backup services, and then 25% off for the next 3 months. That's a significant savings on what we believe is the best backup solution in the industry. We can only offer this for a limited period of time, and that in fact is till next week, October 31st. Happy Halloween. So what will an investment in this advanced backup solution give you? Well, first, it will ensure that your data is protected from both intentional and unintentional damage and deletion. Second, it will give you the tools to ensure that any IT-related disaster won't destroy your business. And finally, and most important, it will let you sleep at night. It will give you peace of mind. So if you're ready to take advantage of one of this offer, please email Suhail. His address is on the slide. Or give us a call, or just post your request in the chat and we'll get the ball rolling. And remember, the deadline for this offer is next Tuesday, October 31st. So I want to thank everybody for their time today and for staying on with us. And now I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
And so we don't have any questions at the moment, Ted, but we do have one comment from David where he indicated that a terabyte is actually 100,000 times more than 10 megabytes. So it's still a huge increase, but he just wanted to clarify that it's actually even greater increase than you had mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the correction. I would not want to have to change 100,000 floppies.
And Isabella has a question as well. How can I be sure that my backup stored on the BCDR device will be successfully restored in the case of a disaster?
Okay. So there's a couple of things that happen here. Number one, part of the data backup process is when it does a full image backup, once a day it does a virtual boot of the server of the most recent backup, and it tests to make sure that that boots up successfully. And if it doesn't, we receive an alert. So that basically tests the integrity of the backup. The other thing that happens, at least with for our clients, is that we perform regular, and it depends on the nature of our client engagement, but we do perform regular test restores to make sure that the backups are in fact running correctly. So I see another question. How long would it take to restore 3 terabytes of data following a backup disaster? So it depends. There are a lot of factors that it depends on. For example, if you have a local appliance and you have a device handy to restore it onto, then the only constraint is the speed of your network. So on a gigabit network, which is the standard most days, you're talking about, I mean, I don't want to do the calculation right now, but you have several hours to restore the data from a local appliance. If, on the other hand, it's coming over the internet, then it depends entirely on the speed of your internet connection, plus what else is going on that internet connection, plus the speed of the connection at the other end and what's going on in that connection. But certainly longer in most cases, unless you are one of the rare people who actually has 3 or 10 gigabit Ethernet, in which case, internet, in which case you would have to have a comparable network equipment to take advantage of it. But basically, a difficult question to answer is sort of how long is a piece of string. I mentioned earlier that a 4 terabyte restore on a 5010 DSL connection would take roughly 10 days. So you can sort of round down or up from that. Next question is, are there any security measures in place to protect the data on our BCDR device? And the answer to that is yes. One of the things that we do by default is we set encryption. So all of those backups are encrypted, and without the encryption password, you cannot restore or see the data. Hopefully that answered your question, but if it didn't, please ask again. Next question. Does Datto provide any service guarantees in case of failure or emergency during data recovery from the BCDR device? I am not aware of specific service guarantees, but what I will tell you is, in my experience, calling data support for a recovery, you usually have a technician on the line within 2 minutes, and they will stay with you until the recovery is well underway, and will check in with you until it's complete.
And of course, if you have any other questions, we want to hear them. We want to give you an opportunity to get your questions answered here live. But if, of course, you have questions that are more offline, you can email Ted or myself. My email is brads@connectability.com, and Ted's is teds@connectability.com. We have one more question, Ted.
It says, what types of data should we back up? It says emails, files, financial documents, etc., and how often should it be backed up? Well, the answer to your question is yes. You should back up everything, because unfortunately, you never know when disaster is going to hit, or somebody does something either intentionally or unintentionally bad. And so you need to be able to recover anything that's critical. In terms of how often it should be backed up, depends on how often it changes. Things like email, for most people, they change many times an hour. So it should be backed up at least several times a day. Historical documents, especially, if your file system is organized that way, some historical documents can be backed up once, perhaps to the cloud or a hard drive or both, and then maybe periodically backed up every 6 months. It really depends, as they say, on the nature of the data. But I always believe that more is better than less, because you never know when you're going to need to get some data. We had a circumstance recently with a client who needed to recover some data. They weren't sure when it was lost. We went back a year, which was as far as their backups went back, and we could not find it. So we know it disappeared over a year ago. We've now increased their backup history to 7 years to prevent a recurrence of that.
Okay, so that looks like all the questions we have for today, Ted.
All right. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for attending. Really appreciate your time. We hope you'll take us up on our offer. We think, we know that it is the best backup solution available, and we hope it's applicable in your environment. So with that in mind, I wish you happy computing, safe data, and a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.